So in this screencast, we're going to get started with Git. We'll show you how to use Git to create a brand new repository and how to use the common Git operations using the command line interface. So before we get started, Git can actually be used completely locally without the internet. So you don't actually have to use Git to share code over the internet with other users on different systems. You can simply use Git to manage your own files on a local system. It can do this because the Git database is simply a collection of files on your computer. So it isn't until you use GitHub, an online hosting service, that you can synchronize your work remotely over the internet and share your code changes with others working on remote systems. So let's create a new empty repository using common Git commands. Before we do that, we should probably define what a Git repository is. So a repository is just a folder that will contain your code project, and it is managed by Git. So all of the files, the source files that you'll use in your code project, must exist within a folder. And you want to make that folder the root for your repository. So whenever you do that, Git creates a folder titled .git, Git, and it's actually a hidden folder at the top of the repository that contains all of the Git management database. So whenever you see a folder titled .git, that means you're inside of a repository. And the Git program will manipulate all of those files automatically. You don't want to manually change files inside of that hidden folder. So let's actually create a repository using the command line interface. To access the command line interface for Git on Windows, simply browse to the folder that you wish to make a repository and click Git Bash here. So let's just demonstrate that. So what I need to do is create a brand new folder, and this is going to contain all of the source code for a code project. I'm going to call this Code Project 1. So I want to make this folder a repository with Git. Open the command line by right-clicking anywhere and selecting Git Bash here. So that will open our command line interface. So this is called Git Bash. A couple of notes on Git Bash. Bash is actually the name of a command line shell from Linux, and it will interpret all of our commands and employ them as Git commands. So the common Git commands we can use, here are a bunch of them. This is what I'll be demonstrating today. We have git init, git status, and so on. So a couple of notes, they're all prefixed with this dollar symbol. So you don't actually have to type in the dollar symbol. The dollar symbol simply tells Bash that everything to the right of the symbol will be interpreted as a command. So when you see these commands, only type from git and then the command name. Do not type the dollar symbol. Also, you can use arrow keys while in the command line interface to scroll through past commands, much like MATLAB. And you can use the tab key to auto-complete commands to try and guess what you're trying to type. So let's create a new repository using git init. So I'll browse to my folder, open Git Bash, and simply type git init. So Git has done a couple of things here. The command line has spit out this message. You have initialized an empty Git repository in the folder on the E drive named Code Project 1. So it has worked successfully. You can also tell that it's successful because it has created our Git database folder .git. So we currently have a working repository. A common command you'll often want to type in is Git Status. Git Status allows us to check the status of the repository. So let's give that a go and see what it tells us. So I go to Git Bash and type in Git Status. So let's make note of a couple of things here. The very first message Git has told us is that it is on branch master. So this brings up an important concept of branches. So branches are actually independent copies of the same project that you can create at will whenever you want to add in a new feature without destroying all of the work that you've done previously. So every single Git repo by default has one branch called the master branch. And this is telling us by default we're on the branch master. So oftentimes if you're working on a GUI and you want to basically change the entire front end of the GUI, you may want to create a new branch called new GUI, and you keep all of the existing work, and then you're going to make your changes on a new branch so that it doesn't affect the old branch. That's what they're used for. They're very useful for Git management. The other thing it's told us is that we're at the initial commit currently, meaning we haven't yet done anything to this repository. So let's actually do something. Let's add in a file and then save our changes to the Git repo. So typically when you've just created a repository, the first change you'll make is adding in a file that describes what the code project is for. Typically these are called README files. So I've just created an empty text file called README, and as a result we've changed the source code in our code project, and we hope that Git will recognize this change. So after making a change, let's type in Git Status. Now we have some different messages here. Again, we're on the branch master as expected. We're still at the initial commit stage, but now it's telling us there are some untracked files. So remember, the whole point of Git management is to keep track of every file you add or change and save them over time. So it's telling us that this file is actually untracked. You're not keeping track of the file readme.txt. Do you want to do that? And yes, we do. We want to keep track of every single source code that is inside of our project. So what we need to do is add the readme text file into our repository management system. The way we do that is using the git add command, the third command here. So it's simply done by typing git add and then the file name in inverted commas. So let's give that a go and add in our readme.txt file. Git add, and so remember, this is referencing locally to our code project folder. So you don't need to include any additional directories here. Just readme.txt will suffice. So to check that it worked, again, type in Git Status, and as you can see, now it is not an untracked file. Git tells us that you have a change to your tracking system that needs to be committed, which is our readme.txt file. So good, we successfully added the readme file into the repo. The next step is to save that change that we just made or commit that change. So we do that using the git commit command. So before I do that, I'd just like to note that oftentimes you make lots of changes to your files and you don't want to add in every single file one at a time. So you can just use git add with a full stop following it, and that will add all changed files into your repo down here. So let's type that in. Git commit. And it just takes all of the tracked changes and will create a save point in your history that you can later refer back to. So if you type git commit with no message initially on a JCU machine, it will actually open this Vim text editor, and it's a bit messy and confusing. So if you want to use Vim, it will open a message box just like this, and you can type in the message that you want to save with your commit. So for this initial commit, I would just want my message to say initial commit with an empty readme, because that's exactly what I've done. Now to save this text in the Vim text manager, you actually have to press escape and then enter the save changes Vim command, which is : followed by lowercase x, and then press enter. And that actually saves that message to your commit. So we've actually added the readme file, committed that change, and given it a nice message so that when we look back on our changes, we can see what happened. So let's check the status of our project. There's nothing else to commit because we've saved everything. So another useful command here is to view all the previous commits that you've made. And we call this the git log command. So let's try that out. So git log will list every single commit that has taken place in the life cycle of this Git repository. Currently, there's just one commit. So every commit is given a unique identifier, that is this long string of alphanumeric characters. It tells us that it's on the master branch, the author who completed the commit, which is me, and the date it was happened, and then of course the message telling us what was changed. So we've only made one change. Let's make another one, and that may wrap up this initial video. So what I'd like to do is actually maybe add some text to the README. So I've added a message to our README file, and I want to actually save that change with another commit. So you've made your change to your code files. You type in Git Status to check that those changes have been rectified. And yes, commit tells us that, hey, you've modified some text in the README file. You should probably add those changes and commit them. So the first thing you need to do is add. And as I mentioned before, rather than adding every single text file by name, just type in git add space full stop. And that automatically adds all tracked files into the tracking so that you're able to commit all changes. After a git add, you can type in git status again. And it tells us, hey, you've correctly added those changes. Now you should commit them. So rather than using our original command from earlier, which was just git commit, I don't want to use that Vim text editor because it's a little bit painful. So what I can do is type in the message straight away in one command by typing -m, which means I want to type in a message, followed by, in inverted commas, the message that you want to tie to this commit. So I would say I modified the README, and that would be my message for this commit. Enter. And now we've made a second commit. And again, let's check the status of all our commits using git log. Git log. So now you can see the log of commits. There's two in history. Our first one is at the bottom. We did an initial commit, and then a few minutes later we did a commit where we modified the README file. So this is the basic workflow if you're working on a local repository. You will make your code changes, add them, commit them.